Good morning. Welcome to episode 52. My name's Gus Logue. I'm joined today, as I am every Thursday, by Mia O'Brien. We've got a really fun episode today. We are copying Trevor and Connor from the PFF NFL Stock Exchange podcast. Don't want to say blatantly copying them, but we
alerted them. We did alert them to this.
Yeah.
So I know Connor replied to me, and of course they're friends of 1010. And so therefore I think it's all love. And I think those boys will enjoy this episode as well, because they do the Fix Your Franchise episodes throughout the course of the home stretch of the regular season, Gus, for all of those franchises that have questions heading into the next off season. And certainly one here in Jacksonville that we can perhaps give even more insight, given the fact that we are boots on the ground here in Duval County.
Absolutely. Yes. This is a Fix the Franchise episode segment, whatever you want to call it. I feel like there's four parts to it. First, there's deciding management, who's going to be the head coach, obviously, who's going to fill out the coaching staff, who's going to be the general manager, if that's still a question to either of us. And then part one of free agency, which is deciding which free agents for the Jaguars to keep or let walk. Part two of free agency, which is signing other NFL free agents. And then part four is a 3-round mock draft, which will actually include 4 selections from each of us, because thanks to Trent Baalke, the Jaguars have 2 third-round picks in 2025. But first, let's do some Jaguars trivia. I got to get my Brian Thomas Jr. stat in here, Mia.
The agenda, it has to live. It doesn't matter what type of episode we're doing on a Thursday.
I can't not talk about him. Brian Thomas Jr. finished his rookie season with 1,282 receiving yards, which is more than any other NFL player other than Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Who was the most recent Jaguars receiver to finish more than 1,200 yards? Was it Keenan McCardell, Jimmy Smith, Allen Robinson, Christian Kirk?
That's a really good one. I don't think A-Rob or Kirk they both got over 1,000, obviously. I don't think they got over 1,200. So I'm going to go with Jimmy.
It is actually Allen Robinson, had 1,400 yards in 2015. He also had, I think, 14 touchdowns. And so he and Brian are the only 2 Jaguars in history to have at least 1,200 receiving yards and double-digit touchdowns. But Jimmy Smith owns like 3 of the top 4 single-season receiving marks for the Jags. And so he's definitely up there on that list. But yeah, Brian Thomas Jr. is awesome. Now that we've gotten past that part of the pod every time, Mia, take me through who your head coach is going to be, what you thought about for this part one in terms of the hiring process and figuring out who's in charge of the organization.
Yeah. So Gus, let's begin with this. Oh, look at those animations. So well done. Let's begin with this. When we workshopped doing this, our version of PFF Stock Exchange Fix Your Franchise, we were both under the assumption, we sat here in these very seats 1 week ago today, and we both said it was 98% that Trent Baalke would no longer be a part of the Jacksonville Jaguars heading into 2025. The 2%, I guess I'm glad we kept the door open, Gus, because you, me, noted sources around the league, people who've covered the league as long as we've both been alive, they're all stunned that he is still here in Jacksonville. And thus, this Fix Your Franchise episode does have a little bit of a pall over it, just ever so slightly, given the fact that I have not created an alternate universe in which Trent Baalke is not in Jacksonville. After listening to Shad Khan on Monday, it was as clear as day to me. He's not going anywhere. He is Shad Khan's eyes and ears when it comes to football operations. With that said, I do have an interesting caveat to how the Jaguars and their new coaching staff can circumvent Trent Baalke. And we'll get to that at the end of this first section. So we'll begin with the head coach. I've made it pretty clear that this is a 2-horse race, not just in my personal opinion, but from my reporting. This is a 2-horse race between Ben Johnson, the offense coordinator for the Detroit Lions, and Liam Coen, the offense coordinator currently for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In my scenario, I do have Liam Coen becoming the head coach of the Jaguars. I have it on good record that, while yes, Ben Johnson is still very interested in the job, Ben Johnson, outside of even the Jaguars, has made it very clear he is going to need the perfect situation for him to leave Detroit. He is going to need the exact staff that he needs. He's going to need the exact front office, analytics staff, whatever it may be. Everything is going to have to be exactly as he would like for it to be. Liam Coen, I think will be more willing to make lemonade out of lemons. One
Right.
thing that I've been asking everyone I've spoken to, and I've recently tried as much as I can to speak to people who've known Liam since he was at UMass as the passing game coordinator, and even before that. One thing that's become very evident, and one question that I've asked people, and they've almost gotten a little offended by, I don't want to say offended, but they've taken a second and been like, no, he's not in that classification. I asked about how Brian Callahan last year was the hot name because he had worked with Joe Brady. He made a certain backup quarterback throw for over 300 yards on the Jacksonville Jaguars on Monday Night Football. Jake Browning. And therefore, that was the go-to for the Tennessee Titans. They didn't let him leave the building. Hot shot offensive mind, even if he'd actually didn't call plays in Cincinnati. And so one thing I've pressed people on is that what Liam Coen is? And that has been the furthest thing from what everyone I've spoken to, independent of one another, who've known Liam from different walks of life. They have all said he is that dude. Sean McVay and company identified him not just as a bright young offensive mind, but as a future head coach in the National Football League almost a decade ago. They felt like this guy, he has it. And that was before Kevin O'Connell ever linked up with Sean McVay. That was before Zach Taylor took the next step in his coaching profession and became the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. This was the guy that they knew early on he had the goods, he had the juice. And as far as how he would deal with Trent Baalke, what's been expressed to me by people across the board is that Liam Coen is the type of guy who will come in and he will talk to the devil, know that he's the devil and hold him accountable, but still have a conversation with him. Whereas Ben Johnson may not be as willing to do so. And I think with Liam Coen, yes, there will be those who look at it and say, oh, it's because he just wants a job. He just wants a head coaching job. I don't think that's the case. I think that he is truly attracted to the possibility here in Jacksonville, having Trevor Lawrence, knowing the investment that Shad Khan is willing to make. He already lives in the state of Florida and seems to enjoy it down in Tampa Town. And I think he truly enjoys, Gus, and this for me is such the crux of it. He truly enjoys teaching the why and explaining to players what exactly like what game situation awareness. He loves teaching that. He doesn't want to just teach X's and O's and plays and get a playbook together. He wants to explain to them, this is why this is why you're running the ball to set up play action, and this is why the tight end is moving across in motion, and actually giving that explanation, not just trotting out a playbook. And I think with this young group here in Jacksonville, because they are still young, I know there are those who say that they are no longer one of the youngest teams in the league, and you're factually correct. But in spirit, this is a group that wants to learn. And therefore, I think he could be that perfect match, much akin to, quite frankly, although a different situation, another Sean McVay disciple in Kevin O'Connell when he got to Minnesota.
There you go. Yeah, I'm definitely sold on Liam Coen. He was my number 2 candidate on Tuesday's show with Hayes behind only Ben Johnson. I feel like he would certainly be a great fit, even if he does have kind of a lack of experience, especially NFL experience, since he kind of jumps back and forth between the pros and college. But the only question that I have, and I don't know if you can shed any light on this, is how badly Tampa Bay is going to try to retain him. Because there's rumors out there. I don't know if they're real rumors or if it's just fans trying to make it happen, where the Bucs could let go of Todd Bowles, especially if they lose wild card weekend, and then just promote Liam Coen to head coach to ensure that they don't lose such a bright mind. So do you think that that's a possibility, or do you think that like he's either going to be a head coach or remain Bucs offensive coordinator?
The irony is not lost on me that we're doing a Fix Your Franchise episode. Trevor Sikkema, once upon a time, covered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I think he has pseudo started that, maybe we should just keep Liam Coen and make him the head
Yeah.
coach. I think he has said it in jest as someone who grew up in the Tampa area. And I think the fans have run with it. Now, my co-host on Helmets and Heels, Taylor Dahl, we got into this exact conversation yesterday, and she was very forward that she thinks it's real. I do not. And I've tried to clarify that with some people. And obviously, look, Liam Cohen's going to keep all of his options open. I mean, if that scenario was to unfold, I don't think he would, be opposed to it. But I also don't think it's a scenario that's going to happen. Todd Bowles, in every year he has been the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, has won a division title. Like, I understand that the defense underperformed. I think it's much more likely that management says to him and ownership says to him, go out and hire a DC and make sure you hit on another offensive coordinator when Liam Coen inevitably goes somewhere else.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, appreciate you clarifying that. Why don't you tell us who Liam Coen is going to hire on his staff as Jaguars head coach?
Yep. And I think this is really important, Gus. I've said it on the air now for a couple of weeks. And when it came to fruition, I had a little bit of a skip in my step as I strutted through 10-10 the other day. Um, I assured you last week and in the preceding weeks before it that Robert Saleh would be a candidate for the Jaguars head coaching job. As Mark Ross of the NFL Network told us on Helmets and Heels earlier this week, 85% of coaching requests are for information. Robert Saleh is being brought in, and I can tell you this full-heartedly. He is being brought in, because Shad Khan respects him as someone who has coached in this franchise before, as someone who he believes is a bright football mind. And quite frankly, he's someone who a lot of people believe Shad Khan views as the one who got away. When he left, his contract was not renewed by Doug Marrone, and he became the defense coordinator with the San Francisco 49ers. He also interviewed for the Jaguars head coaching job in 2021 when it ultimately went to he who must not be named. So, Robert Saleh was always going to be brought in, but he's being brought in because those 4 young hotshot coordinators who have been requested so far on the offensive side of the ball, Liam Coen, Ben Johnson, Kellen Moore, and Joe Brady, are all rumored to have said in their initial, if only through their representation, application, if you may, they have all been rumored to say, I will bring Robert Saleh as my DC and I will bring him back to Jacksonville. I have on good authority, Liam Coen is one of those people. And I think that that is a win-win, a feather in his cap for his application and his process of trying to become the Jaguars' next head coach. So I have Robert Saleh becoming the defense coordinator, returning home to Duval. He would also be the assistant head coach. In doing so, the Jaguars would pay him $5 to $6 million a year. I think that Josina Anderson's report yesterday that Saleh has interest in going back to San Francisco is a great leverage tactic by Saleh and his camp. But ultimately, I think if he wants to get another bite of the apple as a head coach, yes, going back to San Francisco and succeeding under the Kyle Shanahan watchful eye would certainly help his cause. But I think going somewhere like Jacksonville, where there's pieces where you can build and you can teach, because Robert Saleh is another one who really, he prides himself in being a teacher. And he would
Yeah.
not only be teaching this young defense that's been lost in the sauce for the better part of the last 18 months, but he would also be able to be that teacher of sorts to Liam Coen, to be that right-hand man, especially since, yes, Trent Baalke is still in the building. So as my DC and my assistant head coach, I have Robert Saleh. I'll quick run through some of the other names that I think would be on this Liam Coen coaching staff. Spencer Whipple, one of his best friends, co-passing game coordinator when they were at UMass together, would come from Arizona to become the offensive coordinator. He was retained after Cliff Kingsbury was when Cliff Kingsbury was fired by Jonathan Gannon, and so obviously has respect out there in the desert. Mark Whipple, his father, was the head coach at UMass back in the day when Liam Coen played and worked out there, up there, I should say, in Massachusetts. Some other names I have on the coaching staff that may be of interest to some of our listeners out there. The quarterback's coach would be Shane Waldron, who Liam Coen worked with out in LA and at UMass. Once upon a time, Shane Waldron was the reason that Sean McVay found Liam Coen. And so Shane Waldron would come down to Duval County and be the quarterback's coach. A couple other interesting connections that I think might be worth exploring. One name that I've mentioned to a couple of people when they've pushed back on Liam Coen, and then I bring this name up, and of course, because they're Georgia Bulldog fans, they're like, don't play with my heart. Don't play with my heart. Liam Coen had never coached with Brian McClendon. Long time, SEC, wide receivers, position coach, of course, a Georgia Bulldog. And then he brings him to Tampa Town this past season to work with the crew of Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, who is impressing everybody and their mother in the last month or so as he takes a massive step in his rookie season. So I have either Brian McClendon or Leonard Hankerson. I'm not sure his contract situation in San Francisco. I have one of the two of them coming to be the wide receivers coach. Hankerson, a longtime wide receivers coach in the league. He is a Florida native. Would Kyle Shanahan let him go home to Florida? That remains to be seen. Another interesting name to keep an eye on for running backs coach. How about more tapping into the SEC? Cadillac Williams, who played on the Bucs when Sean McVay and company were on the staff back in the early, or I guess it'd be the late 2000s. I think that's the right terminology. Yeah. And so I have Cadillac as the running backs coach. I would have Robert Saleh, who we affectionately refer to as Bob Salad in my household, Gus. So for those of you who saw the tweet where I left clues of how I'm building this staff for Liam Coen, the salad is for Bob Salad. he would bring not only many of his coaches from the New York Jets with him to Jacksonville, but it's many names that Jaguar fans could be familiar with because they were either with Gus Bradley and Robert Saleh back in the day, or they were retained, came back with Doug Marrone. I don't think that you should look at that as, oh no, they're tainted by Doug and Gus, I don't want them to be involved. I think you should look at it as, wow, Robert Saleh and that defensive staff got a lot out of Quincy Williams. They got a lot out of Quinnen Williams. Go Sauce Gardner, go down the line. And so Aaron White-Cotton, Mike Ruttenberg. How about Ryan Davis coming home to Duval? Ryan, if you're listening right now, I know you're listening right now. I think Jaguar fans would sign up for that. And then I have longtime special teams coordinator and former Panthers interim head coach Chris Tabor coming to be the special teams coordinator. I would love for Heath Farwell to stay. Heath knows I am a massive fan of him. He's an incredible coach. I don't know his full contract situation. I have just gotten feedback from across the board, Gus, from so many in the Miller Electric Center. And this was, again, prior to Trent Baalke being retained. The feedback has been, and this isn't just from coaches, this is from personnel across the board. Even if it means losing my job for the betterment of this franchise, they need to wipe the slate clean. They need to bring in fresh voices. You can't have carryover. There has always been carryover since Shad Khan bought the team. And after year one, when he brought in Dave Caldwell and Gus Bradley, someone is always retained, whether it's the strength and conditioning staff, whether it's the nutrition staff. There has never been, in Shad's own words, goodbye to 85 plus people. I need to bring in a fresh slate. And to his point, I don't think everything is broken with this franchise. But at the same time, I think that you need to just, if you don't cleanse it and you don't completely say, we are bringing in a new culture and a new identity, which I understand is scary. The devil that you know is better than the devil you don't know. I don't know how you can actually get progress.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, shout out to Heath Farwell, though. I think a lot of credit goes to him for the Jaguars selecting Cam Little specifically in NFL draft, who turned out to be an amazing rookie kicker, set a couple of franchise records this year. And then obviously Ross Matisic and Logan Cook were both all-pro players, and I think also Pro Bowlers as well. And so he's certainly done great, but I hear you in terms of cleaning house. I certainly agree. Should I jump into what I'm thinking?
Let's hear your coaching staff, because after we do coaching staff, Gus, I do have that one asterisk I mentioned about the administration and the front office side of things in Duval.
Okay, well, I'm going to lead off with the franchise organizational management side of things, because I think that picking a non-Ben Johnson candidate makes a lot of sense for this exercise. But at the same time, A, you did that for me. But B, like there's been a couple reports very recently, I think really just yesterday, Pete Prisco said on a show, and then also Albert Breer kind of mentioned on Twitter that whoever is going to be head coach of the Jaguars is going to have a lot of pull, a lot more pull than in the past, and maybe even enough pull to change some personnel in the organization. And so I kind of feel like Trent Baalke isn't going to retire at this point. I don't think he's going to get fired at this point. But I do think that maybe if Ben Johnson is able to come in and do his interview on Saturday and kind of be the alpha of the situation and say, I'm only taking this job if Baalke is like moved to a different role, I think senior advisor or something like that makes a lot of sense, where the role itself, he has like no actual power to do something. And Baalke will still have plenty of power just by being in the ear of the owner. But if you kind of take away his general manager duties and responsibilities, and allow him to be in the building to keep Shad comfortable, but then allow Ben Johnson to be the coach and bring along Ray Agnew, I think makes a lot of sense as general manager. He's been with the Lions for a couple of years, followed Brad Holmes there from Los Angeles. He was with the Rams scouting department for almost 2 decades. And so I think we've mentioned Ian Cunningham from the Bears before on the show, but I think like Ray Agnew, just double down on the Lions, bring them both in, even if it means or especially if it means demoting Trent Baalke. And so I feel like this is probably not the most likely scenario, but because of those reports yesterday and because you went in a different direction, I felt comfortable enough with going with Ben Johnson. And as I was researching for this episode, or just really as I've been researching and reading over the past week, I've just been blown away by Ben Johnson. He is like far away the best candidate to me, especially for Jacksonville. I think if it's just a general NFL franchise, then Mike Vrabel and Aaron Glenn are both really interesting. But for someone like Jacksonville, who already has Trevor Lawrence in place, to pair with the young offensive mind, it just makes perfect sense. And I think you got to do anything you can to get him. And like the name of this segment is Fix the Franchise. And so if I'm trying to fix the franchise, I'm demoting Trent Baalke and I'm getting Ben Johnson in the building no matter what. So Ben Johnson, head coach, Ray Agnew, general manager. For defensive coordinator, I wanted to go with an older guy at first, someone who's already had the position. Huge fan of Lou Anarumo, even though the Bengals defense has declined over the years. Definitely still believe that he was really the one that took the Bengals to the Super Bowl a few years ago, as opposed to Joe Burrow.
Amen.
Burrow's
Amen.
great,
well, as opposed to Zach Taylor. And that's not just because his last name is Taylor, by the way.
Well, so I was thinking about Lou Anarumo. He's probably my favorite former defensive coordinator that's going to be on the market after he was fired by Cincinnati. I wouldn't be surprised if Dennis Allen landed a DC job somewhere and was really successful. But I ended up going young and going with Christian Parker, who is the Eagles' passing game coordinator and defensive backs coach. He's with Vic Fangio right now. He was with Vic Fangio in Denver, also helped develop Pat Surtain into the best cornerback in the league. This year, the Eagles' secondary has been incredible, especially when you consider that they have two rookies out there in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, who are both defensive rookie of the year candidates, but really the entire unit, the passing defense. I mean, the entire defense is great, but I think especially the passing defense, and especially with those rookies being able to turn around in just 1 year. And so I feel like Christian Parker is definitely future defensive coordinator material. And so if I'm going young with Ben Johnson and Ray Agnew, kind of first-time guys, I might as well go with another first-time guy in Christian Parker, even if I do like the Coen Robert Saleh setup makes a lot of sense, where you get the first-time head coach, but then you've got the DC who's kind of been there before, been there, done that. But Christian Parker, young name to watch out for.
I like that a lot. One thing I will note on Ray Agnew, first off, he did work with Liam Coen as well when they were both with Los Angeles. So just file that one away. But with that said, I've also gotten on good authority, unfortunately, and that's where this is interesting, given the fact that Trent Baalke is still employed. If this had been a clean sweep, the expectation was that the Jaguars would go young for their general manager. I had one league source say to me, you don't get hired as a first-time GM at 56 years old. You can get fired as a head coach for the first time at 56 years old, looking at you, Todd Monken, but you don't get hired as a GM. And so that's the only reason I have reservations about Ray Agnew. For those of you who are looking to pair a Lions connection with Ben Johnson, I know Albert Breer threw out Lance Newmark, and you're all taking it as gospel. Look, hey, it could happen, especially given what his role is in Washington. Could he come in here in Jacksonville and have a similar role? I could see that happening. But the name that I would tell you that I've been told from Detroit, if he is to pluck from that tree, would be Mike Martin. And so Google him, research him. That's the more likely younger name if Ben Johnson was to bring someone who is currently with him in Detroit, because Lance Newmark, after 2 decades, and he's not exactly a youngster either, but after 2 decades in Motown, he is now with the Washington Commanders. The Newmark part, and even the whole conversation, Gus, is interesting. And for those of you who saw my tweet with the clues, you probably figured it out. What my suggestion would be is I would try to essentially create a check on Trent Baalke by bringing in a second assistant general manager who, much like Jim Bob Cooter was as the passing game coordinator in year 1 under Doug Peterson, he was that check on Press Taylor, on Doug Peterson of, hey, I know you offensively, you guys always do it this way, but maybe we try it this way.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I would view bringing in this second assistant general manager to be. And quite frankly, because with all due respect to Ethan Waugh, who I also enjoy and is a great person, he is a yes man to Trent Baalke because Trent Baalke hired him. So the name that I have is Mikey Greenberg out of Tampa Bay, especially if in my scenario, Liam Coen is to be the head coach of the Jaguars. There is a lot of respect there between those two sides. In Tampa, his primary job is to run the cap, salary management. I know there are those who are more concerned about his experience on the personnel and scouting side. That is much more John Spytek. Both of them are receiving general manager requests around the league. Now, by around the league, I mean there's 2 openings, but that's besides the point. Well, that's besides the point. I would bring up Mikey Greenberg just because then you have an ally for Liam Coen or whoever the head coach is. And so in this scenario, if you bring in Lance Newmark, I think the same thing. You bring him in as an assistant general manager because that's currently their title. You probably need to give him a higher ranking title. So maybe it's president of football operations, vice president of football operations, something like that, just to get them in the building so that there is an ally for the coaching staff in those meetings.
Yeah.
And the thing with Mikey Greenberg, I bring his name up just because there is respect with Liam. But at the same time, I actually think Trent McCracken's done a pretty damn good job here in Jacksonville managing the books for the most part. I understand those who have concerns about the void years that Trent Baalke has tacked onto contracts. I agree, especially as we get into the contract portion of this episode. However, I think that ultimately you need some sort of voice for the coaching staff in those front office meetings. And you also need Trent Baalke to not be in the interviews for the coaching staff. But that's neither here nor there. We'll talk about that at a different time.
All right, let's move on to part 2, which is making decisions on free agents who could leave the Jaguars. Here's a list of the impending Jaguars free agents: quarterback Mac Jones, defensive tackle Jeremiah Ledbetter, linebacker Caleb Johnson, free safety Andre Sisco, running back Dearness Johnson, quarterback CJ Beathard, tight end Luke Farrell, defensive end Deshaun Dixon, defensive end Asizi Otonwemi. I'm sorry, I completely butchered that. I'm just going to move on. Guard Cole Van Lanen and wide receiver Tim Jones. So who are you keeping? Who are you sending off into the market?
Well, I've also got some cuts and some trades. So,
We can do that here too.
Yeah, let's so I mean we can go either way, but let's start first, Gus, with the Jaguars have $35 million of effective cap space right now. That is 17th in the National Football League. It pains me. It pains me to do this. It pained me when I heard Connor and Trevor on the PFF Stock Exchange do their fixture franchise. And it's the most logical move. And unfortunately, given the fact that Trent Baalke, as of now, is still employed by the Jaguars and tried to shop him at the deadline, I do have the Jaguars trading or cutting Christian Kirk post June 1 designation. That in turn would make that effective cap space go from $35 million to $52 million in effective cap space. It's a massive number. He would be the highest paid Jaguar on the team. I see Dell put some in the, if you guys are watching on YouTube, Dell just put some more of the comments. It's hard because I talked to Christian 3 days ago and he loves Jacksonville and he is one of Trevor's best friends. He's such a security blanket, but in the same vein, Trent Baalke also drafted Parker Washington, and Parker Washington proved in limited time when Christian Kirk went down for the season with a broken clavicle that he is more than capable of taking those snaps in the slot. Not to mention, we don't know if Ben Johnson, Liam Coen, depending on what offense they come in and run, if you have Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk line up in the slot, but you're also running a ton of 12 personnel, are you even getting Parker Washington or Christian Kirk on the field enough to say, hey, he's worth $24 million. And so that's unfortunately the reality of the situation. Yes, to Hef in the comments. I thought about cutting Evan Ingram as well. There would also be a savings there, but ultimately you need to keep one of those two security blankets for Trevor Lawrence, in my estimation. And Evan Ingram, before he got hurt, while he wasn't having a career year because he was banged up earlier in the year, obviously when he's healthy and available, he still is a top 10 tight end in the National Football League, in my estimation. So I'm trading or cutting Christian Kirk post June 1. I am cutting Ronald Darby. The only option, according to Over the Cap, given his contract situation, is a pre-June 1 cut. That would be $2.3 million in savings. So now you're up to $54 million in effective cap space. I would cut Josh Reynolds, who, if you can believe it, is on the books for $4 million next year. That's an easy one. You're cutting Josh Reynolds. Sorry, Josh. So now we're up to $58 million. And now this is where we get to the free agents that will be retained. I have 1.5. I'll explain what the half is here in a second. Yes, to those of you in the comments, Cole Van Lanen is saved. I am re-signing Cole Van Lanen, who, despite Over the Cap saying he's a restricted free agent, to my knowledge, he is an unrestricted free agent. You give him about a $3.2 million 2-year deal, 1-year deal, depending on how you structure the cap number to be. That brings you back to $55 million in effective cap space. That would move you to 8th in the National Football League in terms of dollars and cents to play with, just from managing the current roster as it is. The half that I alluded to would be a question of Blake Hance. And I think a lot of that comes down to, Gus, where they go in unrestricted free agency and where they go in the draft.
Yeah, I was also on the fence for both Christian Kirk and Evan Engram, but I ended up making the same decision as you, where I kept Evan Engram and cut Christian Kirk. I do think that like maybe you could get a day 3 pick for him in the offseason if the Steelers or the Chiefs are still interested. If the Chiefs let go or don't re-sign DeAndre Hopkins, but probably more likely is them just letting him go. I think the big reason is just because Parker Washington. It's really nothing personal with Christian Kirk. It's just business because Christian Kirk is definitely a better football player than Parker Washington, but at the same time, he's not so much better that he should be kept for more than $10 million on the books. And so it just makes a lot of sense to move on, especially when you consider that he's ended the past 2 seasons on injured reserve. I think if he was healthy through the past several years, then you could make the case for keeping him, but that's just definitely more of a con, obviously. And so I would release Christian Kirk, release Josh Reynolds, process the void year for Brandon Sheriff, make him officially a free agent or let him retire if that's what he wants to do.
I should have noted that too. And I see Kevin Smith in the YouTube comments just asked about it. As far as I could see, it's a void year right now. So technically, it's all but kind of said that he would be an unrestricted free agent.
Right. And then I was on the fence about Ronald Darby, honestly, but I think I'm going to keep Ronald Darby, which I'm probably is going to be a very unpopular opinion because he was statistically and on film, honestly, one of the worst cornerbacks in the league in 2024. But I do think that environment had a lot to do with it. I'm sure age also had to do with it because he's on the wrong side of 30, and cornerback, kind of similar to running back, is a position where like once you kind of reach a certain age limit, players tend to kind of fall off a cliff just because their bodies aren't able to hold up anymore. But I didn't necessarily think that Darby's body was holding him. Again, I think it was situational big time, just because there wasn't a lot of help around him, and especially from the safety room. Apparently, the Jags had the worst PFF grade for the safety position in 2024. And so I think that like what the Jaguars did strategically for the cornerback position last year was good, and it just didn't really work out because Ronald Darby or any of their young guys didn't really quite take a step. But I do think that like a good way to go, especially since you already have starting caliber, even borderline Pro Bowl caliber cornerback in Tyson Campbell, like you can just get a vet and then try to get a young guy to develop behind him. And so that's kind of what they try to do with Darby and Deontre Prince and I guess Monteric Brown, and wasn't really great. But I don't know. The thing with Darby is that if you cut him, you also have $2.5 million in dead money. And so you'd have to tack that onto whatever cornerback you're going to sign to replace him. Because I think even if you think that Darby is awful, like I feel like you kind of got to replace him before the draft if you do let him go. And so to me, I would just rather allocate resources in a different area. I'm going to spend a top 50 pick on a cornerback or just plan on that, even if it's generally a good idea to not like just pigeonhole yourself in terms of positions going into the draft. But I'm just going to keep Ronald Darby and not try to switch up the roster too much because I think that, I mean, as Shad Khan and Trent Baalke both said at their Monday presser, like their expectation or their hope is to make the playoffs next year. I don't think them or anyone else really is expecting the team to be Super Bowl contenders. And so I don't think you need to make any like huge free agency splashes, or at least not a lot of them. So I'm just going to retain Darby. He's got the FSU connection with Jarian Jones. I think he's a solid locker room guy. When he was benched during the season, according to Doug, it had nothing to do with his performance or him as a player or person or whatever. It was just trying to give the young guys a shot because it was a lost season for the Jags at that point. And I believe him when he said that. And so going to keep Darby. We'll just see what happens at that position. But keeping Darby, but releasing Christian Kirk, releasing Josh Reynolds, processing the void year, so kind of sort of releasing Brandon Sheriff. And then I'm also going to re-sign Cole Van Lannon, going to re-sign Deshaun Dixon because he was getting a lot of kind of inside buzz, I think, as like a borderline practice squad player, and then unfortunately had a significant knee injury last offseason. So I'll just re-sign him to stash on the practice squad and see if he can fight for a spot on the 53. And then also re-sign tight end Luke Farrell because he is going to be a free agent. And I mean, if you just need a third tight end, if we're keeping Evan Engram, like you kind of just need a Luke Farrell type player. And so I'm fine with getting him back on the team.
So the reason I didn't re-sign Luke Farrell in my scenario is because this is expected to be such a deep tight end class, Gus. And knowing that both Ben Johnson and Liam Coen, I think, you've outlined for Ben Johnson. I've made the case for Liam Coen on today's episode. Both of them really like to use 12 personnel. They like to go heavy and they like their tight ends. So I wanted to give whoever the head coach is the benefit of picking that third tight end. And especially if it's a pass catching tight end who can be groomed, that you have Brenton Strange certainly entering the third year of his 4-year rookie contract, but Evan Ingram will be turning 31, 32. Can you have that next guy in line on the conveyor belt? And so that's the only reason that I didn't re-sign Luke Farrell, because yes, as Dell noted, his parents are great. He comes from a great family, and I do like Luke, and Trent Baalke did draft Luke. But at the same time, I wanted to give the opportunity to the next head coach to draft a tight end, given how important they are in their offensive scheme. You also brought up a great point with Darby about you can't roll into the draft with a massive hole at a position, to the point that as we get ready to go through the unrestricted free agents on the open market, that was something as I was prepping for today's show. Kevin even said to me on the couch last night, he was like, give me your offensive line. Like, if you were rolling into the draft, can you feasibly say goodbye to Brandon Scherf and roll into the draft, knowing full well you're going to draft a right guard at some point in the top 100 picks, and say, yeah, I have Walker Little, I got Anton Harrison, I got Mitch Morse in the middle, but it's in this final year, and I've got Ezra Cleveland and Luke Fortner's my right guard. And as we're about to find out, that's kind of the scenario I've laid out. But in the same vein as the cornerback room, I think in the cornerback room, you could make the argument, well, we're rolling in with Monteric and Tyson, even though everyone and their mother knows the Jaguars would be taking a corner somewhere in the top 100.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more note on Ingram. I think that Christian Kirk, a big decision comes down to Parker Washington, because the thing is, even if Christian Kirk is a better player, like, they do very similar things and are used in very similar roles. And so it's kind of hard to have two of those guys on the team, especially when one of them is making so much money. But then with Ingram, it's not the same, because he is not the same type of player as Brenton Strange, even if they do play the same position. And I've said on the past in this show that, like, keeping or cutting Evan Ingram kind of comes down to, like, whether the next offensive play caller, like, how he envisions using him. But, like, Ingram is good enough that he should be a mismatch against the majority of defenders. And so, like, whoever the next head coach is going to be, especially if it's an offensive guy, like, should be able to find a way to use Evan Ingram, as opposed to being like, I don't know, like, Brenton Strange is all right and he's a better blocker, so let's just get rid of this talented receiver who just had a historic season 2 years ago. And so, yeah, you want to take us through the NFL free agents that you're going to sign, Mia?
Yes, let's do it. I saw someone in the chat bring up that they expect, if Trent Baalke is involved in the free agent process and still here come March, that the Jaguars will largely sit on what I have right now as a $55 million effective cap number. Unfortunately, I agree. And I want to get that out there in the universe. I would love for the Jaguars to come to a deal with T. Higgins. I would love for there to be a world in which they could say goodbye to Gabe Davis. Neither exists. He's on the books for too much money. Ditto to Eric Armstead. It is what it is. You made your bed, you got to lie in it. And T. Higgins is going to get a massive bag from the New England Patriots and probably go there, folks. And so, unfortunately, I apologize for the underwhelming names I'm about to give you. And so we'll begin in the safety room, as has been outlined on this program. The Jaguars safety room, statistically the worst in the National Football League. I have them signing Ashton Davis, who once upon a time was a draft crush of many here in Duval County. He did play for Robert Saleh up in New York. I have the Jaguars signing him to a cheap, effective 2-year, $9 million deal. That would be a $2.7 million cap year each year of that 2-year deal. And again, perhaps it's a short-term fix, because I don't know, when we get to the draft portion of this program, maybe I'll draft a safety in the top 100. We'll see. This is where I'm so excited. I have Trent Baalke saying F you to all of you, and not doubling down, but tripling down on edge rusher. And so, because he loves hurt guys, I have the Jaguars signing Malcolm Kuntz to a 1-year prove-it deal. He missed the entire 2024 season on the reserve injured list, but he had 8.5 sacks in 2023. The Jaguars signed him to a cheap $3 million, according to Over the Cap. That's the estimation for him. 1-year prove-it deal, much like the Arden Key deal back in 2022. I also have the Jaguars signing Darrell Taylor, formerly of the Chicago Bears and Seattle Seahawks, to a 2-year, $9 million deal. Yes, he has regressed. Back in 2022, he had 9.5 sacks under Pete Carroll and company. He had 5.5 in 2023, just 3 sacks with the Bears in 2024. Perhaps you make the argument that Robert Saleh will get the most out of him, but that's it. That's all I have the Jaguars doing in terms of outside action. I wish I could give you guys more. If Ian Cunningham was the general manager, I would go crazy. But this is the world we live in. I also don't think the Jaguars will extend Trayvon Walker this offseason, but don't be surprised if Trent decides to do that too.
If he extends who? Sorry.
Trayvon Walker.
That makes a lot of sense to me, especially if Trent is still the one in the building. I've got really 2 kind of like marquee free agents, but first, signed quarterback Marcus Mariota. I think CJ Beathard would be fine. I'm not really personally interested in re-signing Mac Jones to back up Trevor Lawrence. Marcus Mariota seems like just the prototypical veteran journeyman quarterback who's like, from everything I know, that he's a just good guy and someone that you'd want in the locker room. And then he also has rushing value, which I think is kind of not underrated in terms of quarterbacks in general, but I feel like underrated for backups is if you can get a backup that does have rushing value, then it just raises the floor of what the offense could be when your starter goes down. So I like Marcus Mariota, but the Jags do need to figure out the backup behind Trevor, even if they do retain a guy. I also have them signing running back Craig Reynolds from the Lions, because I think that they very easily could just re-sign Dearness Johnson. JaMychal Hasty and Dare Ogunbowale are also both still out there as kind of like the same type of guy where it's like a third down back you can trust as a pass catcher, more so a pass protector, trust on special teams, just a good guy to have in your rotation. But I picked out Craig Reynolds from Detroit because he's got the connection with Ben Johnson. And I think that for free agents and really like for the offseason in general, for like the draft too, and even coaching decisions, like filling out coaching staffs, it's all about who you know. And I think that a lot of the times you can just match up free agents with the guys that coach to them or the guys that know them. And so maybe Craig Reynolds ends up re-upping in Detroit or going somewhere else. Again, like the Jags could just as easily re-sign Dearness Johnson, but I think Craig Reynolds is just under the radar name to watch. He could also be a kick returner or a punt returner. And then wide receiver Darius Slayton, just because he's got speed. I think the Jags, obviously they've got speed in Brian Thomas Jr., but they don't have a lot of other true vertical speed on the roster at pass catcher. Like Gabe Davis and Parker Washington, if they're going to get open deep, it's more so like they're getting schemed open or they're running double moves or something like that. Evan Engram, I feel like, could be utilized more downfield, but he's certainly not going to be like your burner. And so I think Darius Slayton, like a 1-year, $5 million deal, basically get him in like to be a DJ Chark. And so if I'm cutting Christian Kirk and Josh Reynolds, then I want to get in another body. Sterling Shepard was another guy I was looking at because he's just another kind of just good vet presence. Was a really good culture guy in Tampa Bay this year. But since he's such good buddies with Baker Mayfield, I wouldn't be surprised if he just re-signed there. And then my 2 kind of real free agent signings that are more big time is one offensive guard, Will Freeze, I think it's pronounced, from Indianapolis. He's really progressed and improved over the course of his rookie contract, but unfortunately had an injury early this year. And so that would be another, if whether Baalke stays or not, just another potential injury discount.
We always need one. Like you can't. You have to check the box off the bingo card.
For sure. And so like how we were talking earlier about how you don't want to go into the draft with any like clear-cut holes. I don't want to go into the draft with Cooper Hodges projected to be the starter unless you draft someone better. And so I think Will Freeze could probably be gotten on a not bad contracts. And then my splash signing, I allowed myself one, is Javon Holland, the safety from Miami, because as we've both said, the safety room needs a lot of help. I think that Jacksonville should probably lean towards investing in the trenches more than anything else during the offseason in general. But I think that safety is just the worst position on the roster. And so I think that for years now, I've like been interested in Budda Baker, anyone that's been even like Kyle Hamilton. always wanted just a playmaker over the middle of the field. Tyrann Mathieu, when he was a free agent a long time ago too. I think they really need a playmaker, and Javon Holland is that. There's a real opportunity here to get a star in the building via free agency, which is pretty rare, honestly. And you probably will have to pay a pretty dollar to pull him away from Miami, because I think there's a mutual want for them to re-sign and get back together. But if you're able to get Javon Holland, and if he's able to stay on the field, then that really is a true playmaker. And I do like Andre Cisco, but I don't know what happened this year. He was not playing well, and so it just feels like a split is coming for that. And so Javon Holland is going to be a big time free agent. I think he could impact a defense the way that Xavier McKinney impacted Green Bay's defense this season.
And of course, he's coming off a down year, so you view it as a discount if you are Trent Baalke. I love your little shopping spree there, Gus. I think that it's effective. I also think your point about Darius Slayton, Sterling Shepard needing that additional X receiver to complement Brian Thomas Jr. to stretch the field, something the Jaguars have lamented, which when in the words of our colleague Matt Hayes, they went slot, circa 2022, even though I wouldn't say Marvin Jones or Zay Jones as a slot receiver, but that's a story for another time. However, as much as we are now going to enter the final portion of today's program, which is our first pick, our first 3 rounds of the Jaguars NFL draft in April, I do want to put a little asterisk on mine because I did do a full 7-round mock. I'm not going to reveal it just yet, but I'm going to give you the names of my 4th and 5th round pick, because that will explain largely why I've constructed the roster that I have. Now, the trouble with that is that the NFL draft is after free agency. And so you can't plan on the player that you want being there in the 5th round. With that said, this is a deep tight end draft, as we noted. This is a deep running back class, as we noted. And that's where I think there's going to be some wiggle room for the Jaguars to work with in terms of rolling into the draft and kind of being like, oh no, what have we done here? And knowing, hey, we will have talent because we have the most picks of any team in the NFL over the course of the next 2 NFL drafts, and we're going to make the most of that.
There you go. All right, so you want to start us off with your 5th overall pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Yes, with the 5th overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft, the Jacksonville Jaguars select Will Johnson, cornerback, Michigan. The last time the Jaguars picked 5th in the NFL draft, they picked a corner. He also goes by he who must not be named in these parts, Jalen Ramsey. That worked out pretty well for them. I have had people in the building who are still there, who are still employed, tell me that, well, yes, Travis Hunter is a tantalizing talent, and if he's there, it will be hard to say no to him. But when it comes to a pure, can play man or zone, but excels in man, you can leave him on an island. He opens up the door for Tyson Campbell and Jarian Jones to make plays on their own, for Jarian Jones to crowd the box. That guy is Will Johnson. And I understand there are those of you in the comments that are upset because, yes, he didn't finish the season with Michigan because of injuries. That was the first significant injury he'd ever have in his career. Yes, there are those of you who feel like you can find a corner in day 2, day 3. Okay. But wouldn't it be nice to not have to worry? Because, yes, Tyson Campbell has his injury history, sure, but wouldn't it be nice that you've got Will Johnson out there? We already know Jarian Jones has proved that he can be one of, if not the best nickel corner in the National Football League if he can build some consistency. Wouldn't it be nice to not have to worry about drafting a corner for the next 5 to 7 years? I don't know. That sounds pretty nice to me. If I'm any of you out there in Duval, and for those of you who are panicking about Abdul Carter and Mason, that is another position that is sneaky deep in this draft. That, don't worry, we will get to the trenches. And don't forget, I already doubled down. I signed 2 veteran edge rushers. Like, it's okay. Be happy. Trent Baalke already got you your edge rushers.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I said earlier, I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of draft and develop cornerbacks, especially when you already have a number 1 in Tyson. But like with Will Johnson, you're just kind of overthinking it if he is there at number 5.
For those who are like losing their mind, like there's people losing their minds right now in the comments because they're like, he's not Jalen Ramsey. No, I never said he was Jalen Ramsey. I'm just saying the last time you picked 5, you picked a corner and it worked out. Will Johnson's comp is Pat Surtain. If he's Pat Surtain, like you're all happy until the cows come home.
The Pat Surtain comp is really all I needed to hear. He's just, again, the best cornerback in the league right now. If he was being compared to Darrelle Revis, I'd be like, all right, hold your horses. Like, I don't care who you are as a prospect. you can't just be compared to Darrelle Revis. But yeah, I think the passer team comp makes a lot of sense. He's just physically, mentally, just everything you would want from a corner. The tape is just outrageous. And the thing is, like, I think that cornerbacks in the first round are generally very safe. I know that obviously the Jaguars had a bust in CJ Henderson. The Lions, Jeff Okudah, still don't really know how that didn't turn out because he felt like the safest cornerback prospect in the last decade. But other than that, like, cornerback is generally a very safe position to take in the first round. And again, I think you're just overthinking it if you pass on Will Johnson and he is there at 5th overall. I said earlier that, like, this week I just became more convinced that Ben Johnson is like the clear-cut number 1 head coach candidate to me, especially for Jacksonville. And I didn't really explain that, but it's mostly just because of all of the stories about how good he is as a communicator and with like detail orientation. And just as the more research I do, the more confident that I am that he's not just an X's and O's guys, but that he can lead an organization. And then like the next most thing that I talked myself into this week was Will Johnson being like
Johnson and Johnson. That's
Johnson and
Johnson.
For sure. Like, I think Will Johnson is just a can't miss. I don't want to overthing it. And so I've also got the Jaguars taking him at 5th overall.
Let's go.
He's allowed 2 touchdowns in his college career, and he has 3 pick sixes. Like, that's all I need to hear. You don't have to convince me much further than that. So you can finish up your draft, and then I'll do my full one. But yeah, we've both got Will Johnson going number 5.
First things first, Alpha Leopard is losing his mind in the chat right now because draft the trenches, draft the big boys first. Come on, Mia. Alpha, I don't know if you're going to like this, but I got a big boy for you at the top of round 2. And I saw his name get mentioned. Again, for those who saw my tweet with clues as to what my fixture franchise fix would be for the Jaguars, you may have seen the state of Arizona's state flag as one of the images that I tweeted out this morning. That is because I don't know how to pronounce this next individual's last name. Just like we refer to Robert Saleh as Bob Salad in my household, we refer to this next cat, and yes, he is a wild cat. We refer to him as Jonah Arizona, and that is because I cannot pronounce Jonah I can't pronounce his last name, but he's a dog. And he plays right tackle for the Arizona Wildcats, who I know had a disappointing season in their first year in the Big 12. But this guy is a 3-year starter, 330 pounds. He anchors well. He's expected to play guard at the next level. He is a plug-and-play right guard. For those of you who have been clamoring, guard, second Matt Hayes reference of the program. And for those of you who have been clamoring for nasty, Jonah Arizona is your guy. And so I have the Jaguars picking him with their 2nd round pick. Again, 6'5", 330 pounds, a 3-year starter, mean in the run game. Go ahead. There's your road grader, folks. Enjoy.
There you go. I love the pick. I've definitely got an interior offensive lineman in this draft. But my 2nd round pick was Jack Sawyer, defensive end out of Ohio State.
Jack.
I mocked him in the 1st round for the Jaguars, like before the season started, I think, or just at some point in 2024. And so I was a little surprised to see his name drop down to the 2nd round in a lot of consensus big boards. And so I think from what I saw, he just didn't really take as big of a step as a lot of people were hoping as a pass rusher. But he's still very much a high effort player, great in the run game. And you definitely need to build the trenches behind Trayvon Walker and Josh Hines-Allen at defensive end, which I know you hit on in free agency. But I think part of the reason that we're able to take Will Johnson at 5th overall, despite people in the comments yelling about trenches, is that the Jaguars are set at like premium positions. Like, they do have a cornerback already in Tyson, but they've got their 2 bookend tackles and bookend ends in Hines-Allen and Walker, and then in Walker Little and Anton Harrison. And so it doesn't really make a ton of sense to go like interior offensive line in the 1st round. Like, even if you think Will Campbell is the best prospect in the draft, you can always find solid interior offensive line prospects on day 2, which each of us did. But like, the only defensive line that I was really considering taking at 5th overall was Mason Graham, because there's a really big drop off in terms of defensive tackles who can rush the passer. I think part of the reason that Mason Graham was one of the pros of that pick last year is that you just don't find a lot of guys after round 1 who can rush the passer from the interior. And so like Chris Jones, I think, is like one of the only players in the last decade who's near the top of the league in sacks and was taken after round 1. And so I thought about taking Mason Graham for that reason. But at the same
But it's
time,
okay, Gus, because Eric Armstead's going to move back inside to his natural position. So he's going to rush the
right.
passer.
Yeah, like they already have Eric Armstead and Mason Smith, so it's like a pass rushing defensive tackle isn't really a huge need. Plus, like I don't really, even if Trent Baalke leaves, I don't really buy that they're gonna kind of fix their Aiden Hutchinson mistake by going after another Michigan defensive lineman with short arms and just not the build that at least Trent Baalke wants. So yeah, but I do, even if I'm not hitting on trenches in round 1, I definitely want to hit the defensive line by round 2 because I think that edges are going to fly off the board in this first round in 2025. And so you want to make sure you land one. There's a kid out of Marshall who has some just a great profile. I forget, I think it's something green, I want to say. But I feel like he could be a sneaky first rounder. But so Jack Sawyer or just a defensive lineman is really my second round pick.
And I do want to note it was very painful for me. Two of my, and we're going to have our 1010XL draft guide, folks. Round of applause. Yay. We're going to have our 1010XL draft guide back this year. Gus is going to be leading that project on 1010XL. With that said, we both have just started. We're in our infancy stage of reviewing tape and looking at prospects. So humor us. We promise in the weeks ahead, we're going to have much, much more in terms of actual draft analysis. With that said, early returns for me, it was painful to know that I needed to take Jonah, Arizona, because as much as y'all are upset about the trenches on the defensive side of the ball, you've been upset about the offensive side of the ball and the offensive line for much longer. And so it was painful to see Kyle Kennard of South Carolina, Landon Jackson of Arkansas still on the board, and knowing full well I could not take either of them because I had to go with the mean mugger from Arizona, which is fine because I think Jonah, Arizona, plug and play, right guard. It's what the Jags need. With that said, we go to the third round, top of the third round, the Jaguars' original pick. And this one I felt like I had to go edge to the same point that you just made, Gus, because I had him with the first 2 picks. And so I have the Jaguars with their first third round pick selecting Tyler Barron, edge rusher out of Miami, who of course began his career at Tennessee. He had 10.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks his final season at Tennessee. He also had 41 pressures last year in a Miami scheme that obviously on defense struggled in terms of stopping the run. That wouldn't be Tyler Barron's primary assignment here in Jacksonville. And it wasn't his primary assignment at Miami, where he was certainly part of his own hockey shift rotation because they had so many guys that Mario Cristobal brought in through the portal. 11 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, so comparable numbers. 6'5", 260 pounds. So he's not too light. He's not a massive Trayvon Walker. He gives you that in between. And again, he's a guy that you could develop. And if one of those 2 free agent signings that I made don't work out on the edge, then hey, you've already got another guy you're developing behind him. And also I thought you were developing Miles Cole, but hey, alas.
Well, in some shape or form, the Jaguars definitely need to add to the defensive end room at some point this offseason. I went with interior offensive line for my third pick at 70 overall. Interior offensive lineman Tate Ratledge from Georgia, who's probably the best offensive lineman on that group last year. He was also probably the best pass blocking prospect coming out. I'm not necessarily sold that he's going to last until 70, but I just think that, again, a day 2 interior offensive lineman makes a lot of sense. Even if the Jaguars do sign a Will Freeze or a starting caliber guy in free agency, I think it definitely makes a lot of sense to draft a guy who would theoretically be able to replace either your free agent addition at right guard and or Ezra Cleveland if they got injured first and foremost, but then also if you just ended up letting them walk once their contracts expire a couple years down the road. And so again, for this pick, like it's less so about the name and more so just about the position. I think it makes sense to go with an interior offensive lineman at 70 overall. And so for the last pick of our 3-round mock, who do you have the Jaguars taking at 92nd, Mia?
Yeah, so I alluded to it. I have the Jaguars signing Ashton Davis in free agency, but that far from fixes the safety room that was the worst in the National Football League this year. They do still have Antonio Johnson on a rookie contract. Maybe he takes the next step forward under Robert Saleh's tutelage. I don't know. I have the Jaguars selecting what I believe is what we thought Andre Sisco would be. Andrew Makuba, safety, Texas. The
Hmm.
Makuba missile crisis comes to Jacksonville, folks. This guy can do a little bit of everything. I know he's undersized, and we'll see exactly what the arm length is because we still have to do that because Trent Baalke's still here, which sucks. But again, this is the world we live in, and that's the world that we're creating in this fixture franchise fantasy that we've created here today. He is a guy who can play in the box. He is hard-nosed, get up in your face, has no issue tackling safety. He also is rangy enough that he can also drop back and be a center fielder as well. And I think that versatility serves the Jaguars because they need a little bit of everything at this point.
I love it. I went receiver here because I think that even if you do get Darius Slayton or some like just solid veteran rotational guy, you just really need to add depth to a lot of places in the roster. But I think especially wide receiver because Brian Thomas is awesome, and even if the team keeps Christian Kirk, I just think you need some more depth at the position. And so I went with wide receiver Jack Beck out of TCU, who is just like the definition of grit. I feel like if he ended up going to the Rams, he would be like just the next breakout guy for Sean McVay there. And so he can clean up a little bit of like his wide receiver polish, especially with route running. But this guy is great at yards after the catch. He's probably the best blocking wide receiver in the draft. And so I feel like that makes a lot of sense with a Ben Johnson offense in general. But really the Jaguars need depth, but they also need some run blocking, I think, at wide receiver. I don't think that any of their players are like poor at it, but they certainly don't have any great run blockers either. And so I think just to get that mold of player in the third round makes a lot of sense. And especially like I think the yards after catch is huge because like Evan Engram is pretty solid at it. Brenton Strange has had some flashes. Brian Thomas is definitely good, but like I think just it makes a lot of sense with he's the kind of guy you want to pair with just like a new offensive play caller.
Gus, I love your draft. Jack Beck was a guy I did do like a off the top of the dome. I didn't actually do it through a simulator draft last week. And unfortunately, and I don't think we can go without not addressing it, our thoughts are with Jack Beck and his family after his brother was one of the 15 people killed in New Orleans on New Year's Day, which is god awful.
Yeah.
But even before that situation, Jack Beck was on my radar for all the reasons you just outlined. Additionally, while he will graduate from TCU, and that is who will be the school name that is attached to him when his name is called in April's NFL draft, he did start his career at LSU with Brian Thomas Jr. and is a Louisiana guy. And what have we been saying for the last month of the season? If you draft somebody from Louisiana, there's a pretty good chance if they're a wide receiver, they're going to turn out A-okay. His comp is also Cooper Kupp. And so back to my my fixture franchise situation, Gus, where Liam Coen is the head coach. Who was the assistant wide receivers coach for Cooper Kupp his first few years in the league? Oh, that's right, Liam Coen. So yeah, that could be a fun one. That could be a fun little project.
Absolutely. All right.
And I did want to note, so I did want to note just to kind of put a bow on it. I did do a 7-round mock. I'm not going to send it out into the universe, but I have 2 4th-round picks for the Jaguars. I noted it, and I think this is going to be really important to watch. This is a very deep tight end class. So I understand those of you who are going to yell at me because you think it's my bias. It's not. I do have the Jaguars picking Luke Lachey, tight end, Iowa, with the first 4th-round pick that they have. He is a guy who, when Sam Laporta was banged up his junior year, I think it was, or maybe it was his senior year, there were those around the program who believed that Luke Lachey actually had the higher ceiling at the National Football League level. And he got banged up himself over the last 2 years, and so he's kind of fallen off draft radars a little bit. I hope that he bounces back in the pre-draft process because he's an elite talent. He's obviously comes from tight end university, and he's a solid run blocker, but also I think he is Sam Laporta light, and whether it's Ben Johnson or Liam Coen, that obviously would be a nice little match for the Jacksonville Jaguars. With the second 4th-round pick, I have them going wide receiver. And in that situation, I have them bringing somebody home. Pat Bryant, Illinois, Atlantic Coast High School's own. His Twitter name is Duval Pat. We're going to bring Duval Pat home. And he's another guy who has taken a step forward each year out in Champaign-Urbana. And he is a true stretch the field guy. I would comp him to a bigger bodied Zay Jones, who can perhaps be a bit more of a high point specialist in the red zone, but he can stretch the field and he can run too. And so I have them taking Pat with the 2nd, 4th, and then they would go running back in my scenario in the 5th. And I know there are those of you in the comments saying Cam Scattaboo, and I'm here with you. Like, if he's there, take him, because I think he's got that edge, and you need that edge. But
Mhm.
I really like Damian Martinez from Miami. And again, not just because he plays in the state of Florida. He started his career at Oregon State. I think that that bowling ball is the one element the Jaguars are missing in that running back room. And his contact balance is absolutely absurd. And so I think that they will go running back at some point day 3. And I think you can find a capable guy who not only is a complement to Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby, but could even supplant them further down the line in his career.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be a really good but also deep running back class, and so that would definitely be a good position to keep an eye on for just possible day 3 Jaguars picks, maybe even day 2. Maybe Baalke will spend another third.
There's
uh,
going to be a linebacker. Like, just ready yourselves, folks. There will be another linebacker on day 3. Just brace yourselves.
Absolutely. All right, is that all your picks, or did you have more you want to
No,
say?
that's it. I kind of threw some darts in the 6th and 7th round, but I did just want to make sure I got those 3 picks out to y'all, because I think it kind of paints the full picture. I know there will be those who say, my goodness, she didn't draft any interior defensive linemen. I don't know where you want me to play him. Like, you've got Eric Armstead. You can't cut him for the next year. You've got Mason Smith with 3 more years to go in his rookie deal. You paid Devon Hamilton. It costs more to get rid of him than it does to keep him. Yeah, and then Jordan Jefferson was drafted last year to be the backup nose tackle. And
Right.
so, could you add somebody into that rotation? I think Darrell Taylor maybe rotates inside a little bit. I'd love for Trayvon Walker to rotate inside a little bit. So I don't know, like, where else you could fit another big body with the roster as it is currently constructed, which it was constructed by Trent Baalke, who is still here. So
Yeah, that was totally my thought too. I like went into this exercise planning on investing heavily in the trenches, and I did an interior offensive lineman in the draft and free agency, but that ended up being pretty much it. Just because, I mean, Jack Sawyer at round 2 of the mock, but like the position group is already kind of filled up. Obviously, they need to add a outside linebacker / defensive end type body. But as far as the interior goes, like there's already a lot of guys under contract, and I think it makes as much sense to just give them a chance to play and develop as it does to just automatically kind of give them the boot and move on. And so if the Jaguars do really face a kind of bigger organizational shift, then maybe we'll see that happen where a lot more new faces are brought in. But either way, realistically, it's probably a good chance it won't change that much. Same goes for the entire roster. But to recap, I had Trent Baalke moving to an advisor role so that the Jaguars could hire Ben Johnson as head coach, Ray Agnew or Mike Martin as general manager, both from the Lions. Defensive coordinator would be Christian Parker from the Eagles. I did not fill out the rest of my staff. I didn't get as deep as Mia. But then process void for sheriff, release Christian Kirk, release Josh Reynolds, sign Cole Van Lannon, sign Deshaun Dixon, sign Luke Farrell, sign Marcus Mariota, sign Craig Reynolds, sign Darius Slayton, sign Will Freeze, and sign Big Fish Javon Holland. And then my draft was Will Johnson, Jack Sawyer, Tate Ratledge, and Jack Beck.
And to run through mine in my scenario in which we fix the Jaguars franchise, unfortunately, Trent Baalke is still here. However, I bring in Mikey Greenberg from Tampa to give head coach Liam Coen a voice in the administrative side of things. And perhaps Mikey Greenberg is able to become the next general manager of the Jaguars when Trent Baalke's contract runs out in 2 years' time, I was told this week. I know a lot of us have been saying he only has 1 year left on his deal. I've heard from a couple of people on good authority it's 2 years left, and Trent Baalke intends to finish his contract, at which point he would be 62 years old. Head coach Liam Coen, joined by defense coordinator and assistant head coach Bob Robert Saleh, the offensive coordinator Spencer Whipple, currently the passing game coordinator out in Arizona, was the co-passing game coordinator with Liam Coen at UMass. Chris Tabor joins as the special teams coach. We love you, Heath Farwell. If you want to stay, I'm never going to say no to that. And then as far as my moves on the current roster, I would trade or cut Christian Kirk as a post-June 1 designation. I would cut Ronald Darby as a pre-June 1 designation, cut Josh Reynolds, re-sign Cole Van Lannon, potentially re-sign Blake Hance. I do love your move to re-sign Deshaun Dixon. Maybe we'll circle back to that at another time. My free agent class is a little bit light because Trent Baalke is still in the building and he wants to pay his own guys. Maybe we see a Trayvon Walker extension this offseason. I have the Jaguars signing Ashton Davis to a team-friendly 2-year deal. I have them signing Malcolm Kuntz to a 1-year proven move-it deal, the edge rusher from the Las Vegas Raiders. And I have Darrell Taylor, another defensive lineman / edge, signed to a 2-year, $9 million deal. And in the draft, first 3 rounds, Will Johnson with the 5th overall pick, Jonah, Arizona, plug and play right guard. I'll never be able to pronounce his last name. I promise I'm going to workshop it. With their 2nd round pick, and then Tyler Barron, edge out of Miami, and the Makuba Missile Crisis out of Texas with the Jaguars' 2nd, 3rd round pick.
There you have it. We did it. We fixed the franchise. 2 different scenarios. Pick your poison. But I feel like this worked out really well. Great exercise. We'll have to run it back, I don't know, at some point soon. But as Mia said, we will definitely have a lot of draft content coming up, even if this was kind of just a small little preview, a little taste of what's to come. We're going to have a full draft guide with a lot of draft content rolled out starting just after the Super Bowl. We will be back for another episode of Duval Rundown on Tuesday. That's all I got. Mia, any parting thoughts? Or
no, we appreciate it.
This is a long episode.
It was a long episode, but we appreciate so many of you who tuned in. I know there's a couple hundred of you that were watching on Twitter throughout the duration of today's hour-long episode, so thanks for sticking with us. A ton of you guys interacted on YouTube. Be sure to tell your friends, share this episode. It'll be available on demand. I'll make sure we get a graphic up, too, that recaps what Gus would do, what I would do, and you guys can debate about it on the 1010XL digital channels. We appreciate you guys, and we appreciate Connor Rogers and Trevor Sikkema for coming up with this idea for a podcast called Fix Your Franchise, and excited to bring it to Duval Rundown.
Totally. Shout out to Trevor. Shout out to Connor. Shout out to all of you guys for watching and listening. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. Take care.